Hello again, gamers and gamettes, and welcome to yet another episode of Not So Hardcore Gaming. I'm your host, Jeremy, and today we're talking about Predator Hunting Grounds. Now, this obviously will be slightly different to a lot of episodes I've made, and I always like to preface that because most of the games I talk about, they've got story to them, and this game doesn't. This game has no story, right? So that always makes it a bit different, and this one is even more different because it has no characters either. So there's a bit less to talk about, so I like to, preface that because it does change the way I film an episode at least a little bit. But going into it, I still have quite a bit to talk about, so without further ado, let's get into it. Starting off, I want to talk, as always, visuals and audio. And I want to add in to this that I was very surprised at how the game looked and sounded, because this is actually a very small game. Even for games which have online requirements, even if there's no story that comes with it, which will often make it smaller, it's still quite a big download because it takes quite a bit to get it to look good and sound good. But for this game, I think it was about 13 gigabytes to download it to my PlayStation. And yet, this game looks amazing. I love the look for the game. There are multiple arenas that you play throughout, and the layout for them are very different, like very, very unique. When you look at a lot of other games, even if they have multiple arenas, they can look a bit samey, so it doesn't stand out as much, whereas these ones, they are largely different. And, depending on which arena you're in, it will change the mission for those who play on the fire team. We'll get into that in a bit. But for the game to look this good, you'd expect it to be more because it is detailed. I don't know the exact specs for it. I don't know 100%, but when you look at it, you don't really notice. You can't say, "Oh, that doesn't look good." So even if I don't know exactly what resolution it runs under, I love the look for it. You've got your foliage looks more than detailed enough, especially when you're always on the move for it. It doesn't have to be super high quality, whereas in other games, when you take your time, you would notice it more. So for this game, when you're playing as the fire team, you are always on the run. So I guess for that, it doesn't have to be perfect. So even if there are some less noticeable issues, there is just no way to know them. So when I'm looking at it visually, I have no complaints whatsoever. The amount of detail through them, obviously, you've got your characters. Your character customization will be a different topic. But the characters themselves have quite a bit of detail put into them. There's no grainy look, and even with some of these really high-quality games, it has some film grain, where it just looks a bit odd. This, I haven't noticed anything with that. You've got your ground that you run over. You've got quite a big difference with it. You've got normal dirt, you've got big pools of mud, which sometimes it's like full-on water, which the reflections are surprisingly good as well. And you've got those big contrasts. When you go into a building, it has a fair amount of detail on it. Again, as I said, it's not super detailed, so you'll look at some of them and it's a bit smoothed over, so you can look at it and say, well, it looks a bit odd. But when you're playing the game you wouldn't notice as much because you're moving. So when I say this, like, it looks really good, there are some aspects that are noticeably less, but because of the way the game is set up, you don't notice them as much. So for the visuals, I can't really complain at all. It's because it has enough detail to make it look good, whereas not being so detailed that it becomes a massive game. So looking based on its size, it looks so much better than I would have expected. In terms of sounds, there isn't as much. You know, there's your characters have some voice lines, relatively little. You know, there's only a couple things that you get from it. But when you listen to their voices, the voice acting isn't half bad. It's nothing exceptional, but it's not bad. So, you know, you've got your mission debrief at the start of every game. You have like comms where you talk to people, you know, who aren't part of the game. It's an NPC talking about it. When I say for this, you know, I'm saying this mostly from I play a lot of Fireteam, so you know the voice acting is good for it. When you go for the Predator, the noises are actually quite good as well. You know, obviously the Predator doesn't have voice acting. He doesn't speak. He just roars, and I quite like the roar for the Predator. In saying that, I can't really compare it to the movies, for example, because obviously this is all based off the movies, and I've never seen the movies. I know that that's not very popular, but, you know, I can't compare it to that as much. So based on what I know, which is at least from the game, I quite like the noises that come with it. When he attacks, you know, you get the slicing sounds, because he's got big claws, that sort of thing. Quite enjoyable. And as well as in terms of the visuals for the Predator, he looks good, you know, and in terms of visuals, you've got the helmet, and when the helmet comes off, you see his face with it. So you've got helmet on and off as two different looks for the same character. He bleeds, so you'll see blood trails as well as blood all over him, that sort of thing. They're nice details, you know, relatively minor, and you look at it and say, well, yeah, obviously they've got that. But then you look and you say, you know, it's not like a given always, so having that detail is nice. So yeah, you know, visuals and audio in general for this, I was very surprised by just how good it was. So, very impressive. Moving on from that, we'll talk, because it's sort of similar with visuals, we'll go straight to the customization. Now, the customization, you've got your two different teams as always. You've got your Predator and your Fireteam. The Predator customization was a lot more restrictive, in my opinion. It could have done with more details, you know? There are less colours available for it, less patterns on his armour. His face doesn't have much, and I guess you can't go too big when you go off a game that's based off a movie, you know? You only have so much freedom before people will start to complain, so I can get that to a certain extent, but I was a little bit disappointed with it. I think the customization for the Predator could have been a bit higher. You know, when you use different weapons, maybe a few more skins for the weapons, because there just wasn't that much for it. Then you move to your Fireteam, and the customization options were broad. You know, you've got, as I said, you've got more different faces for it, so you can customize your character themselves more, and then you look at their armor. You know, you can wear helmets, bandanas, anything like that, there is a much wider selection for customization in the fire team. And, the weapons themselves, there's a wider array of weapons, each which have a lot more skins and a lot more patterns, all of that. It just seems it's like such a big divide between the two. When you look at the Predator, it felt restrictive, but the fire team is broad. There is a lot of customization you can do, and sometimes you look at it and you think it seems a bit too different. There's too much of a different feel with them, and it was a bit of a shame. But as I said, I can understand it to a certain degree, and throughout this, when I'll talk about that, I have to bring it back to it's surprising for the game's size itself. So I think they definitely could have done a bit more with the customization. I would have liked to see a bit more, but I don't have any major complaints about them. The customization options that were there, I liked. I just wish there was more. Moving on, we'll talk about the weapons themselves. Now, the Predator weapons, again, as I said, there wasn't quite as many of them, and I found when you look at them, some of the weapons you'll have require higher levels, and the level requirements for the weapons felt a bit too spread out. It felt like you had to get too many level ups before you had that next option. So not only were there fewer options, but it would have taken you a lot longer to unlock those other weapons. And that's just a shame for it. In saying that, and I will make this clear, I haven't played the Predator as much. And full disclosure, it's kind of because I suck at it. As I said, I know I've said this many times before. I talk about games, and I play games a lot, but I am not great at them. So, as I said, the Predator, I haven't played as much, but I guess that sort of emphasizes how noticeable the difference between the two is, because I noticed that the weapons and the customization were lacking for the Predator in the little time that I've played as the Predator. Then you go to your fire team, and the weapon options, don't get me wrong, the weapon options still felt a bit restricted. There wasn't as much as I expected. It was still limited, and yet it was so much less limited than the Predator weapons. It's sort of, both of them weren't as wide as you would like, but there was that big divide. And that just was a bit of a shame. The weapon designs themselves, again, I've said, you've got your sword and that for the Predator. You've got, I think, a couple ranged weapons, which the coolest one would definitely be the bow. That just looks cool, and I've seen a couple people using it. So the Predator weapons, the ones that you find, they do look pretty cool and they work quite well. But there's just not a hell of a lot to talk about on that. The fire team weapons, you've got your different classes. As always in these games, it's sorted by class. So you've got your assault rifles, sniper rifles, or just, long distance. You've got your pistols, you've got as assault rifles, RPGs, that sort of thing. They're all sorted into your categories, and that allows you to adopt your play style quite well, as with any game that has those types of weapons in it. As I said, I would have liked to have a couple more options in each one, just a little bit more to look at, a little bit more to work towards, that sort of thing. But the weapons that are there are quite fun to do. I like to main with an assault rifle and a shotgun as my two weapons. that allows for a bit of ranged combat as well as very close combat. That's just the playstyle I go with. And those two categories that I choose from seemed to be the ones that had more to them. The assault rifles is the biggest array of them. There are a lot of those. The shotguns, there weren't as many as I would have liked, but enough to give a bit of flavour, so to speak. The game design for them, I'm not a major fan of the way it was set up, which is, having to rank up the weapons more to unlock a different scope. I can understand it to a degree, but at the same time, it can be a bit frustrating, that certain attachments for it are such a distance away, and if you do it for one weapon, you have to go and level up another weapon quite a bit before it can become useful to you. So you end up playing with the same weapon because otherwise you feel underpowered. It doesn't make the same dent in it. So it's like putting a handicap. You're like, I've been using this weapon. Not only am I used to this weapon, but it's gonna do more damage. Why would I change to another one? So the way it's set up ends up leaving you to stick to the same sort of playstyle. There's not as much incentive to go and use another weapon, if that makes sense. Which is disappointing, you want to have more reason to do them, and for me, I just didn't find it as much, so I just continued with the same weapons after a while. In saying that, I can understand, you don't want to be able to just outfit it fully. So it's sort of, I can see both sides of the argument, and in the end, I think there could have been more of a middle ground, whereas it didn't feel as much. I don't know, that may sound weird to a lot of people, but that's just the way I've looked at it. The weapon designs themselves, I like the look of them. They feel good to use, and each, if you do decide to go and rank up other weapons, they're minor enough that, you feel like you're using the same weapon while still having enough of a difference to add flavour to it if you do decide to go and upgrade all your weapons. Those are some of the biggest things, that's the three that you get to. Then comes probably the most important thing about any game, the gameplay itself. I found the game ran quite smoothly for me. In the time that I have played the Predator, I've been very impressed with how fluid his movements were. You go up and you climb a tree, and it just feels good and it looks good. It's the way he climbs is smooth and enjoyable to watch. And when you go to each different tree, some of them have multiple levels you can climb to them. And then you can leap from one tree to another or just make big leaps over the earth. And that is one of the coolest feelings for this. So the Predator, the gameplay for the Predator is very, very fun and smooth. And that again, as I said, is surprising. Looking at it, I didn't expect it to be as smooth as it is. You'd expect them to put enough work to make it pretty smooth, but this was a surprising level for me. And I think, most people who would play the game would want to play as the Predator because that they've watched the movie, they think it's a really cool thing. And so you'll notice a huge disparity between, if you choose to play as the Predator, it can take 5 minutes to wait, whereas if you play as Fireteam, you can find a match in under a minute. So I think that's why it's as smooth as it is that they knew that people would want to play as the Predator far more than playing as the Fireteam. So it explains it a little bit, but nonetheless, it is impressive just how smooth it came out for being a smaller game as well as an online game. you know, when you go on an online game, you can find some things will lag no matter like if you have good internet or not. It can sort of depend if other people have different internet, because you've got that relay between all the people playing. It can slow it down if just one of the people has less internet, if that makes sense. And in this one, and keep in mind, I live in Australia. We are renowned for having shocking internet. Terrible, terrible internet. And I live out in the country. I live in the middle of nowhere where the internet is a step below the rest. So I have terrible, terrible internet. And yet this game has played smoothly for me. I have very little lag, and I've felt like it's running smooth and looking smooth when I was playing as a Predator, and I expected it to be a bit slower and a bit more demanding, and yet I almost never had a problem with it. And that alone is impressive because it means that the game is less demanding on it while still being pretty fun and pretty good looking. So the gameplay for the Predator, beautiful, absolutely beautiful. As the Fire Team, it's also done very, very well. The gameplay is completely different because when you're playing as the Predator, your only mission is to finish off the other team. Just wipe them all out. That's your only goal. When you play as the Fire Team, you have two missions. One, survive. The other will be, depending on what map you go to, you're also, trying to shut down a drug cartel or something like that, That's your secondary mission above survive. And then the two, or I guess 3 ways you can do it is 1, kill the Predator and recover the body. That's one way you can win as the Fire Team. Another way is to survive and just do all your missions and then just escape. So there is, those 2 are the only ways you can really win with it. So there's not 3, I apologize. But it's interesting seeing, there's 2 aspects to the gameplay as the Fire Team. And it is a good challenge because when you're playing as the Fire Team, you have 2 factions trying to get you. You have NPC humans who will try to stop you the whole way through, and you have the Predator. So you're fighting off 2 people at once, and it's not easy, especially if you're in the middle of a firefight and the Predator comes in, you get overwhelmed very, very quickly. And yet, the challenge isn't a bad challenge. Some games when you play it, it seems, less you can master this into it, and it just seems like it's a bit overboard. But for this game, it's a pleasant challenge, and I guess it's a case of multitasking as well. It's challenging gameplay done right. When you're going more into the detail of the gameplay, your weapons all run smoothly. The aiming down the side, there's not as much customization options as you have with others, as much sensitivity upgrades. It's not as broadly customizable to each character, but it's enough. Again, it's enough. So the gameplay for both sides is fairly simple, and I think it's coded very well. So the weapons work how you'd expect them to. And each weapon you have is obviously has to be coded differently because the weapon acts differently. And all of them were done right. So like playing through, I haven't noticed any weapons that just didn't work. There was no glitches in the gameplay. They all were smooth, and all of them were customizable enough while, not being wildly different. And again, that there's always a middle ground with these things. There's too much and too little, and this I found was perfect for me. That's most of what there is to talk about. So based off the size of it, it is better than I ever would have expected. The online gameplay for it is always smooth and one of the least demanding games I've come across. You know, I can do it on even crappy internet and not have any problems with it. That's a rare thing to find. The customization options for the game and the visuals could be upped a little bit, but I can't outright complain about it. You know, I can't say, oh, this is terrible. It was alright. It could have been improved. And if it was worse, you would have said, yeah, that's pretty bad. But it's just good enough that you can't overly complain. And that is Predator Hunting Grounds. I got this game from PlayStation Plus a month or two ago, and I was going to get it, and I wasn't in any rush to, but then friend of the channel, Blaze, he got the game and he said, oh yeah, you definitely got to try it, because he was really enjoying it. So I said, you know what? Sure. I got it, and I really enjoyed it. And what I found interesting, we enjoyed it for different reasons. He loves playing as the Predator. He said he really enjoys that, and I really enjoy playing as the Fire team. So it's interesting seeing the two preferences that came out of it, and it was a very good recommendation from him to try it, and I greatly enjoyed the game. As I said, I didn't enjoy the Predator side of the game as well because I'm just not good. I mean, I'm not that great on the Fire team either, but that's beside the point. I had a lot of fun with this game, and I greatly recommend trying it yourselves. It's a very, very small game to download, so you can download it fairly quickly and start playing, and it won't take up too much space on your console, so you don't have to go and delete another game to put it on. So I do recommend trying it, for sure. And that is the end of today's episode. Thank you once again for joining me, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye.